I am beyond excited to introduce our next guest, Angelovska-Wilson. She is a top human being, crypto enthusiast, lawyer, a variety of other descriptors that I will allow her to describe for herself. And we have had a number of conversations, Angela and I, the last 6 months or more now, about multiple aspects of Web3. Her world and the way that she as a business operator, entrepreneur, attorney, et cetera, are able to weave together the different aspects, right? This training day event is helping to level up Web2 product managers into Web3. Well, that requires an understanding of enough of what's going on across the landscape in order to weave together products to help humans. So, Angela, welcome. We'd love to learn a little bit more about you. For those who don't know you, take it away. Welcome. I think you're muted.
Well, I am still not working the Zoom button after so many years. I am still muting myself. Thank you, Will. Thank you, everyone, for having me at this training session. It is beyond exciting to see it actually happening. I am thrilled that there is a special focus on kind of moving from the Web 2 to Web 3, and to repeat some of the things that we were just talking about right before this. There's so much demand in moving from Web 2 to Web 3 that the ability to understand kind of the intricacies and the different aspects of what's going on, as Will was saying, is an enormous help both in your professional, personal lives as we go forward. So a little bit about myself. You can probably hear from the accent. I am an immigrant. I'm a Generation Zero in the US. I came during the Civil War in Yugoslavia, as I like to say. They started the war because I left. I spent my career kind of going into just about every interest that I had, which is basically everything. I find a lot of things interesting. I started out actually, I was a communications major, but really got excited about this new thing called the web, the internet. And then I wanted to really understand how you commercialize it and how do you make it valuable, and what rules are going to apply to this new system and community. And then I got into law, and similar journey in digital assets. I discovered kind of Bitcoin back in 2012. And ever since then, I have been working in the space from a lot of different angles, both as a operator. I'm a co-founder of a fintech. As an advisor, I serve as a senior advisor on a number of different projects, and collaborate with protests and the Banyan DAO at times. I also am a lawyer. I co-founded a law firm called DLX Law. I am actually not active on social media at all. But my partner, my co-founder, Louis Cohen, is, and he is New York crypto lawyer, if you follow. So we do so much work in this space and have done it for a very long time. And one of the prevalent themes that we are seeing these days is really a lot of companies trying to move from the Web3 environment and really understand how they continue to develop and how do they change in a Web3 environment. And a lot of that is actually, driven both by some of the strategic thinking within the company of people who are kind of seeing the future. But a lot of it is actually driven by consumer demand. And, as people talk about it, there's this very, I'll call it kind of dismissive air that comes to like, oh, it's crypto, it's NFTs, it's, these little things. And I actually remember talking to some of my regulator friends in Washington, D.C., and saying like, we really need to think about how do we view these assets, right, from a regulatory and legal perspective and give people certainty about them. And, the response was way back when, a friendly response, not an official response. If Angela, if we give it, any kind of a acknowledgement, that means we give it credibility, and it's so little. It's just a pimple. Like in comparison to the current financial system, there's really no need for us to do anything. Well, $1 trillion, $2 trillion later, they're starting to pay attention. And so there's a lot of regulation that is coming through, and a lot of people playing catch up, both from a market perspective as well as from a regulatory and a legal perspective. So I try to do all of it, sometimes successfully, sometimes not so much, but the important part is I keep trying, and it's super fun, and I'm really looking forward to some of the questions that Will is probably going to throw at me, and I very much welcome the questions that you have.
So thank you. For everybody, if you want to put any questions in the chat, I have it open so I can make sure to chime in on it. Obviously, as a room full of product managers leveling up into Web3, there is lots of talk about the vision of Web3 that you hear everywhere on Twitter and Discord and different sessions, and popular media picks it up. And then when you Google around, like, what does it mean? Then you get into spaces where you are start to develop smart contracts, and you're like, okay, I don't want to write code. So for the product managers, like, okay, I want to run this project. How on earth do I do this from like a practical, I have to set up an entity, or like, how do I think about it from a legal standpoint? What advice do you have for product managers that are just curious about the nuts and bolts of trying to stay out of jail?
That is always a good thing, staying out of jail. And so the first thing to understand is that the laws and regulations continue to apply regardless of whether or not you name it something different or it's taking place somewhere else. The way that the regulators kind of look at things is they look at it as like, that looks very similar to X. And therefore, these things that we've put in, safeguards that we've put in for those products should continue to apply. There is a lot of confusion out there because of how that approach does not really work in Web3. And the reason why it doesn't is, and I am going to steal an analogy from my partner Lewis, and that is, if you think about how governments think about borders, right? And we have all these different laws, regulations, armies, passports, negotiations, how you set up the border, outlines, physical outlines that are all designed to have that sovereignty of the land, of the country. Well, what Web3 does kind of is it actually invents a teleporter that can be in everyone's living room. And it doesn't cost very much. And it's in every single person in the world has the ability, mostly, to have a teleporter. And so think about it. I am here today in California. I actually want to drop in and have lunch with Will in Washington State, or let's say he is in Paris. I take my teleporter, I show up in his living room, we have lunch, I use my teleporter and I come back. I have just completely, passed any of those land laws and regulations. And that is, and there's no one, right, at the French government or wherever, or the US government that knows that I actually went across the border. I didn't ask for a special permission. I didn't need to show my passport to anybody. I didn't need to even identify myself, right, when I was doing it. And that's what we have when we think about, what does Web3 unlock? It's this power to transform the financial services in a way that removes all these different barriers, safeguards, regulations, and things like that. So from a practical perspective, this is kind of the 10,000 foot picture, but from a practical perspective, what does that mean? Well, there are certain principles that continue to apply, which are, if you're working and doing things in the United States, my recommendation always is that instead of taking on personal liabilities, that you form a simple entity. It can be an LLC or a corporation if you have plans, especially to have investors and grow and get big. That gives you some protection on your personal liabilities. I like to say, I like my house, I'd like to keep it. So it's a good step to do it. And it does not need to be anything complex, but having it will give you a little bit more of a peace of mind. The next step that I always tell people that they need to think about is, obviously, no matter what the product is, what the service is that you're offering, you're going to be subject to tax. So you're going to have to, just because you're selling NFTs in a direct relationship or on Twitter or other platforms, as your people are paying you to do things, all of that income actually needs to, you need to figure out a way to report it, because we all know if there's one agency that, that has the power to halt everything to a stop, is the IRS if you're not paying your taxes. Now, I understand there is a lot of confusion about how do you treat the different income and staking rewards versus capital gains versus miscellaneous income and all of these things. And your tax advisors, your accountants can help you with some of that. You can read up, and so long as you try to do your best, hopefully, it's not going to be an issue. But if you don't do anything, it will definitely be an issue. From there, I think, as a product manager, you need to think about, what are kind of the core principles that you want to put forward in your business. Are you going to make your work subject to a, open source license, which is kind of the ethos of the Web3. And then with that comes the, again, the thinking through the commercial parts. How do you commercialize it? How do you actually, create income and make it work long term, not just one time? And then, as you think through those things, there's always especially in the NFT space, there's a lot of discussions about intellectual property rights. As you're developing products that may be going into the metaverse, right? Think about what are you building on, right? Do some digging on the project on which you're building, the tools you're building with, making sure that, there's a lot of services out there, so to speak, that say like, oh, just, copy and paste our code, and then you are able to do things on a, no code basis. We'll write you a smart contract for you. Well, could be really, really good, could be really, really bad. So, I think a general good common sense due diligence on what you're doing and with whom always applies.
So the team that put together this event threw out a really interesting topic as part of our session today, which is the tokenization of value. Based on your extensive experience seeing lots of projects start from all sorts of front row seats and stories that you probably are not allowed to tell us, what does tokenization of value mean to you?
That's a really hard one. There's always, as I like to explain, for me, value always has to be viewed in a context. And the reason for that is that, certain assets are way more valuable during a war than during peace. Certain assets are much more valuable, like a bottle of water in the middle of the desert is probably way more valuable to someone than it is, on a regular basis in their house. And so when we think about value, I think one of the things that we always have to remember is the context. In the Web 2.0, the context through which we looked at value, right? Because it was really hard to figure out value at the beginning of Web 2.0, was eyeballs, right? How many people are you having engaged with or, part of your product? And then we got the Facebooks and others that monetize the data. So in the Web 3.0, what I see in the tokenization space is import of some of these concepts, right? One of the value metrics in tokenization is the amount of engagement that happens within a community that is supporting the token. Another aspect of it is the buzz, the amount of times that it's trending, the value that comes from really coming through all of the noise that is out there and being kind of singled out to be able to have a voice. Another aspect of the token valuations is who the team is and what are they doing. Are they developing, or do they have a record of developing things that are successful? That to an extent is a lot less in the Web 3.0 because we are so at the very beginning, right? Think about it as, established directors, movie directors were turning down Netflix at the beginning because they were like, I'm not making a movie. Steven Spielberg was not making a movie for Netflix 10 years ago, right? Even if they came with $100 million or $1 billion and they said, do it, he would be like, I'm not associating my name with Netflix, right? Now he is. And so, some of that value actually is going to grow, and we are going to see in the Web 3.0 teams, people, individuals that are going to have value. All of these things put together form the basis for the tokenomics. And, I want to remind people that a lot of the economic value that we are seeing in the different tokens and the different networks and things like that are based on what people see today, the engagement with things today. And so as a product manager, I think the number one thing when you think about tokenomics and kind of each one of these categories is to think about what is the long-term value? What are the kind of key ingredients that I can work on and allow others to help me with? And I think that's the differentiating factor from Web 2.0 to Web 3.0. You are not responsible for every aspect. There is, and you should be relying on the community to be helping you to give them what they want, right? I don't subscribe to, Steve Jobs is like, everybody's going to do what my vision is because they don't know what they're doing. I do believe in the power of the crowds and the wisdom of the crowds. So lots of things.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask a dangerous question that every NFT club out there doesn't want me to ask.
Okay.
And obviously there's not a lot of regulatory clarity right now. And in 2017, we all learned about this little test called the Howie Test. Because we were wondering if buying this token from a common enterprise with the expectation of profit based on the work of others, we were like, I wonder how the Security Exchange Commission and others are going to think about this. Well, ICOs stopped being a thing, largely because of at least some more communication from the SEC and other regulatory bodies around the world, that was potentially problematic. Now, fast forward a few years, here we are buying these things based on the work of a community of people. If we're honest, with an expectation of profit based on the work of others out there. And is this any different than buying a sneaker from Nike or a physical thing and just saying, I bet this relatively rare sneaker is going to increase in value? Or what can you say or not say about those of us just really curious about that particular question and the regulatory environment in general?
Well, I'm glad that, and based on some of the comments in the chat, that a 60-year-old case is being used in such a expansive way to explain certain regulatory aspects. There are a lot of cases and other things that explain the rationale at Howie and why, the result of certain things, right, is not a security, but the investment into a certain scheme is. So orange groves, an investment into an orange groves is going to be a security. But the oranges themselves should never be a security, and Safeway shouldn't be having a broker-dealer license to sell oranges. And this is really what I'm talking about when I say, like, we just have a new technology that is challenging the ability of the regulators to put things into boxes that they understand, because it can't be the same thing. So when you think about tokens, what do they represent? One of the key aspects of a security, it is usually the rights that are associated with it. In a token, what rights do you have? So that's a good question to always ask. What are the rights that are associated with it? The reality is that, until the regulators give their opinions on things, I think we will go through a period of uncertainty, which is basically what we are going through right now. And I do think, the market and the way that people do things is going to push the regulators to understand a lot of these intricate aspects of how things actually work and why they're different, and why certain economic incentives are not, shouldn't be treated the same. And we have a lot of examples of that where it has happened before. I'll give you one which I absolutely hate, because there are lots of reasons why legally it is not the same. But airlines give you airline miles as an incentive to keep using their airline. They technically have no value, but we all know you can exchange it for a value. You can get the things that, like a new ticket or whatever, buys things from other things. The difference between airline miles and tokens is that if you actually read the terms and conditions on the airline miles, they don't belong to you. They belong to the airline. So it's the ownership, the title of the asset. And then the other thing that, again, nobody pays attention to because of the market dynamics is the fact that if you read the terms and conditions, which, only if you're suffering from insomnia, I would recommend, it will also say that you may not trade them on secondary exchanges, right? Like you cannot, exchange them for anything else. You can only do the transaction with the airline. And so, again, when some of those products were coming online, there were, a lot of discussions about how to do things, reward points, right? In, stores and other things. And so I think one of the things to, again, when you think about the tokenomics, is to think about what is it for, right? What does the token do? What does the token incentivize? What rights does it give? What are the kind of crucial elements of it that are not solely related to, well, this is how I raise money, right? I'm not going to investors. I'm going through, a lot of people to buy my tokens so they can help me build my product so that I can make a lot more money. That does sound like a security.
So then just in general, right, there's a lot of product managers here that may have to convince higher ups in their organization that, yeah, we should do this Web3 thing. And the higher ups might say, oh, not enough regulatory clarity, let's not do it. Do you see something in the horizon that is promising or not promising for at least clarity for the Web3 community in different jurisdictions around the world? Or what's your overall take on the regulatory roadmap here?
Well, I mean, I think the regulatory map, as always, things will get more complicated because before they get simpler. I think there is definitely a focus now on digital assets by a number of different governments around the world, and governments and politicians are definitely subject to FOMO. So there's a lot of discussions that are ongoing with respect to this. Probably one of the, I would say for me, one of the most encouraging signals is a proposed bill that hasn't been made public yet, but it was announced that it was coming, between Senator Loomis from Wyoming and Senator Gillibrand from New York. And it's a great effort to actually provide a regulatory framework for digital assets. And what I find extremely encouraging is that we have, very democratic base with Senator Gillibrand leading kind of the charge there, and with all of the financial services and others in New York, because the focus at Web3 kind of regulatorily has been on the financial services side, right? The stable coins and other financial regulatory matters. And then Senator Loomis is, on the Senate Banking Committee, Wyoming, Republican. Wyoming is one of the leading, states with a lot of state legislation and laws and regulations that provide some of the clarities of where things kind of break down in the traditional legal frameworks. I also see, the presidential executive order gave a number of the different agencies a charge to kind of study the digital asset space. That could be a mixed bag, but we are now we are starting to see somebody like Secretary Yellen, who was an enormous critic of CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, and others start to embrace the concept and start to try to understand how does it work. And in a world where value is assessed, transferred outside of basically any government purview. So lots of interesting things to come.
Are you generally thumbs up, thumbs down, optimistic, not so optimistic about, let's say, the US environment?
I am very optimistic. I actually think that, there are risks, but, as I like to say, there's only one legally, 100% legally and regulatorily compliant business that I have ever seen in my life. And I have worked with everything from like one person to startup to $1 trillion companies. And the one business that is always regulatorily compliant, legally compliant, is the one you don't start. So I hope that's an encouragement to you not to be overly worried and wait until there's a full clarity on everything, but take the principles of good business practices, make sure that you comply with the laws that you are clear on, and then, the rest of it will kind of come through. And think about it, as I like to say, like always think about it, from an empathy point of view. If I am doing something and I was on the other side, how would I think whether or not this was fair, this was, exactly what I promised I would do, how would this reflect on my reputation if I don't do it? And so again, good common sense always works.
All right, last couple of questions here. Thank you for your patience. The person I see with the raised hand, you want to go ahead?
Hey, what's going on? Could you speak maybe about, I've explored bypassing the SEC by kind of doing your raises through tokenizations outside of the domestic US, right? I've seen a lot of companies getting a little more traction by just, not allowing the distribution to be had in the United States. Maybe speak to some of the implementation that you see that we would have to go through. That would be interesting also.
Yeah, I mean, there are different paths that people take, and like everything else, it all depends. There's one clear answer. Whenever you ask a lawyer, they will tell you, well, it depends. And the truth is, it really does depend. So, there are a number of different paths that people take in the space. And whether or not they work, the jury is still out because we haven't seen any enforcement actions thus far. Just like we didn't see any enforcement actions in the ICOs for some time. Just like the SEC didn't go after Ripple for 5 years, like the minute before the statute of limitations expired. So just because you're not seeing it doesn't mean it isn't happening or won't happen. The paths that people take, and I'll talk about I'll call it 3 models that people are doing. The one model is, you assure that there are no US investors. You set up a foundation typically in the Caymans or one of the other island jurisdictions. And then people, because you actually cannot issue tokens out of a Cayman entity because they have a law on the books, virtual asset service providers, then the tokens are actually issued by a BVI entity or another set of entities. And then the governance stays with the Cayman Foundation. Another path that people have done is they have a disappearing Panamanian foundation, which actually puts in motion the smart contract, and then it disappears. And then you add the Cayman Foundation and then the BVI entity, and you do that.
What do you mean by disappears? Can you maybe tell us?
It dissolves.
You just dissolve the entity after you?
Yep.
Okay, got
Once the smart contract goes into, is born, right? It's, put into existence, so to speak. Then the foundation is dissolved and disappears, and it's self-disappearing. So there's no action that needs to be taken by anyone to do it. I'm quite skeptical on that approach. There's another one but this is a very, very specific use case and very kind of fraught with a lot of things that people don't understand that well. And those are, Guernsey trusts, as well as Swiss foundations. So one of the things that people, if they want to follow the Ether model, they look to a Swiss foundation. The issue is that very few people have wanted to do it because the Tezos, Ether, Cardano are all Swiss foundations, and they were done, I'll call it, in the first iteration of this, they have learned some of the drawbacks of doing some of the things. One of the major drawbacks on the Swiss foundations is that you are actually paying taxes on the value of the tokens that you're issuing. And you have to declare that in advance. So.
Wow. That was awesome. Angela, can you post your LinkedIn profile? Because I couldn't find you on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I'm there. I'm terrible at LinkedIn, but I will be happy to post it.
All right. So Trace, so I guess two final questions. One, Angela, Nathaniel asked, I think, a really great question around where can PMs keep up to date on the legal ebb and flow. So if you wouldn't mind, after this session's done, if you could just maybe paste in a couple of resources.
Absolutely.
But Trace, last question, take it away.
Oh, yeah, I was just asking about self-pollution efforts. Last one I remember was from 2017 when I was at Consensus. They launched their Brooklyn project, and the idea that by recommending sensible regulation and policing ourselves, that that others would police us less or police us more sensibly. I know that Andrew Yang is doing his lobbying efforts with Lobby 3 and such. Like, what recommendations do you have for the industry at large and for companies in particular to, aside from the way to set up your token, that could help you stay on the right side and not have to launch everything in Gibraltar?
Yes, sorry, I did forget Gibraltar, but that's also circa 2017, and so is Malta. And as I like to tell people, like, Malta was so cool. Everybody went there, but nobody could get out. It was my tip always when people are choosing foreign jurisdictions now because of Malta is always to say, like, now I know it's really easy to set up an entity, but like, if I need to dissolve it and stop doing business in your jurisdiction, how easy is that? And that's also another question for some of the Swiss and others. That it's good to know. It's not just what you can put in place, it's how do you unwind it. I mean, there have been a number of different efforts in the industry to do something with self-regulation. Maybe because of the ethos of crypto, it's kind of hard to get people to agree on, a self-regulating effort that actually works for everybody. It just doesn't. And like the exchanges, all the big exchanges used to have this, whatever council that used to review tokens for listings, and they would, figure out whether or not something was a security. It fizzled. It didn't do anything. Kind of the same with the Brooklyn project. Very familiar with it, know it well. Again, a lot of the self-regulatory efforts are difficult, not because there aren't principles that can be put in place, but because there is such a diversity of uses, use cases, ways of doing business, because everybody's still trying to figure things out. And, in a lot of ways, it will hinder some of the innovation that is happening if everybody has to go into the same mold.
All right. Well, thank you. Yeah, if you wouldn't mind just posting a couple of resources. I know there's a number that you've even shared with me and reliable places to get up to speed on those that are working in a regulatory context, et cetera, et cetera. So
absolutely.
Angela, this has been fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, everyone. And I am super excited about what all of you are going to do as your next act. And I'm going to be watching, and I wish you much success.